Well, welcome folks to the Perspective panel on the next stage of business creation and innovation, and thank you all for attending today. I'm Betsy Bishop. I'm the president of the Vermont Chamber of Commerce, and I will be your moderator for the next 75 minutes. 15, at least, of those minutes belong to you, the attendees. So I encourage you to think of your questions, ask along the way, but we will be getting to them toward the end of the session. There is a closed captioning option, which will be enabled. It is enabled by our tech host, but if you choose, you can turn that off by hovering over it at the bottom. So I'm going to get started today with our panelists. We have 4 amazing panelists today, and I'm going to ask each of you to do a self-introduction. I'm going to go in the order of Matt, Callie, Leslie, and Blain. Please give us your name, title, organization, and perhaps a brief physical description. One of the reasons that we do this is so that everybody of every ability can understand this is Betsy Bishop's voice. I am the one with a very beige background, a white shirt, and short brown hair. So I've already done my self-introduction, so I'm going to go to Matt and then continue on. Matt?
Hi, this is Matt Dunne. This is my voice. I am a slightly balding white guy with a bookshelf behind me in our house here in Heartland, Vermont. I'm the founder and executive director of the Center on Rural Innovation. We're an action tank that's dedicated to closing the rural opportunity gap by building digital economy ecosystems and startups in rural America.
Hi everyone, my name is Callie Hastings. I'm wearing a green shirt, I have long brown hair, I've got a plant behind me. And I've got 2 different hats at this point. I'm a co-owner of Fat Toad Farm along with my parents that I've been a part of and running for 14 years. And I'm also recently the program manager for the Vermont Forest and Farm Viability Program out of the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. And yeah.
Hi, I'm Leslie McCrorey Wells. I go by she, her pronouns. I have brown curly hair, brown skin. I have a green scarf on and a black shirt. And I have a painting behind me and a couch. I'm co-owner of 3 restaurants in downtown Burlington, Pizzeria Verita, Trattoria, Delia, and Sotto, Enoteca. And also we've added a online shopping experience, Sotto Provisions, since COVID. Let's see, and I think that's pretty much me. I also own a farm in Grand Isle, Vermont.
Awesome, privileged to be on the panel with everyone here. Blair Newton. I'm the tired-looking father of 2 very young boys, sitting in front of a TV panel with some sketches of our aircraft and in front of a snake plant that was actually part of a cutting that my mother was given when I was born, and I'm wearing a blue shirt. I am a team member here at Beta Technologies and am responsible for finance and operations, and just thrilled to be chatting with you all today.
Oh, great. I love the self-descriptions. It adds a little bit of an icebreaker as well, how we describe ourselves, right? So, so welcome to this perspective panel where we're going to really dive into, this is less about presentations and more about our reactions and our thinking about the Vermont proposition. And it's really an opportunity to share our thoughts and our perspectives and even our vision of the future of the state. So we will incorporate or try to incorporate the whole Vermont proposition with a focus on business, entrepreneurship, and innovation. So before we start, I'm going to make a few more announcements. We have a chat box and a Q&A box. And for those of you who are just familiar with the chat box, we are going to try to refrain from using the chat box unless you have questions about technology. Something's not working, you can't get audio, something like that. Our tech host, Caitlin, will address those. But if you have questions for the panelists that you want to engage in Q&A, please put your questions in the Q&A box. And that's the one that I'm going to be monitoring. And Caitlin, our tech host, will be monitoring the chat box. So I'll probably remind you of that again as we get toward the end. So try to help us out with that. And this portion of the session will be to hear reflections and stories and knowledge of the panelists, and we will take your questions at the end. So it's really important that you help us engage with that, or else you're just going to get my questions and you won't get your questions answered. So that would be great. I always like to put people on notice that you're part of the agenda. So I encourage that. So I'm just going to try to frame this topic a little bit, and then we're going to delve into some areas here. For those of you who hopefully have read either the short form or the long form of the Vermont proposition, incorporating all of them is going to be difficult in an hour. And I don't think all of us have something to say about all 9 of those things. These things range from climate change to diversity to poverty to conservation, and addressing them all in this section is certainly a tall order, but we're going to try to work through most of this and try to bring those elements. I'm counting on my panelists to bring different elements of that to the conversation. This section is really focused on business creation and innovation, 2 things that are in constant evolution, which we have folks from really diverse backgrounds as our panelists. And I think that's the point. Innovation to one person means something very different to another business person. They're not all the same thing. But I'd like to really frame these up into sort of 4 key areas. And when we think about delving into the next generation of work, how do we think about our youth in this way? How do we think about training our youth, mentoring our youth, getting them to be entrepreneurs and preparing them for constant change and innovation, which is what we need. So that's sort of one category, is that next generation. As we think about the future of Vermont, they are the key to all of our success. The other area is sort of support systems for innovation, things like co-working spaces. There's all sorts of new lending options like crowdfunding, micro lending. How do those fit into spurring entrepreneurial growth? And leveraging state purchasing contracts. Is there something that we can do with the power of all the things that the state purchased to spur growth in rural areas or in populations that need extra help? What can we do there? And then one of the more traditional items is business growth. How do we scale up, whether that is a farming facility or a restaurant or an aviation company? We have so many diverse, different types of business. How do we scale up, and what does that mean Vermont style? And then finally, something that runs through every single business is the health of our workforce. We're going to have to, as employers, continually innovate for the workforce. And we've seen that in spades over the last year plus with COVID, as the entire sort of office community worked from home. That will be an innovation, but also with wages and with flexibility and all of that. How do we make sure that we have enough people working in Vermont? How do we retain them, and how do we get more? So that's part of the conversation as well. So that's sort of the end of my framing, and I'm going to really start the idea here with asking each of our folks if they could share their vision on just one of those topics. Pick one of those 4 and sort of share your vision about what you think the future of Vermont. What do you think is the most critical here? What are the things we as a state need to be focusing on in the next 3 years to be successful? And then sort of really, when I see the number 30 years, which they say 3 or 30 in the documents, that's a really big change. So I'm going to start with Matt. I know you're certainly not shy and willing to jump in here. So if you could get us started and just share your perspective and your vision of Vermont in those key areas.
Great. Thank you, Betsy, and thank you for framing it so well and kicking it off. You know, there are a couple of ways that we think about it. One is to make sure that innovation and entrepreneurship is taking place across the state of Vermont. And not just concentrated in one area or another. We, just like with the rest of the country, there is real challenges when our urban centers are the only place that are having economic success. It causes all kinds of housing issues and other kinds of things, but it also is not tapping into the full spectrum of talent and capacity. And one of the hallmarks of Vermont was for 200 years was that there was a really interesting distribution of where innovation was taking place. Scales up in St. Johnsbury, organs in Brattleboro, machine tool in Springfield. I mean, there just was a fascinating vibrancy in all these different communities, which just went away for a while. And so we're doing work right now in Springfield, Vermont, Brattleboro or Windham County area, and we're starting in St. Johnsbury and Rutland to try to reawakening that sense of entrepreneurship, and particularly entrepreneurship that's scalable. That's what we focus on. The other that I would say is the importance of making sure that we have some aspect of the automation economy in our state. And I say that because if you look at the economic divide that emerged since the Great Recession, it came about because of the automation of traditional rural jobs, and both through being able to do those jobs anywhere in the world, but also being able to do it with fewer and fewer people. That was true in factories. It was true in the woods when a feller buncher could do the work of 10 people. And so what has come out of that is that the jobs that were created over the last 10 years coming from automation, there were lots of them. There were millions and millions of jobs in computer and technology jobs, but they were almost exclusively created in urban areas, while they were almost exclusively removing jobs in rural. And in the age of the internet, there should be no limit to where digital economy jobs and entrepreneurship should be able to take place. And so right now, rural America represents 15% of the nation's labor force, but only 5% of the digital economy jobs. So we believe that if you want to get equity in terms of economic mobility and resilience in the face of automation that's going to continue, you need to get that 5% up to 15%. It doesn't mean that all rural jobs need to be digital economy jobs. God help us. And it also doesn't mean that all digital economy jobs need to be in rural. It just needs to be a part of it. And we need to be unlocking that innovation talent to do that automation and computer science and robotics work in rural places, and the entrepreneurs who have those ideas to be able to come out of those places. We're seeing it happen in small ways in Vermont, in places like Springfield or White River or up in St. Johnsbury. And we think we can grow that and create a lot more balance and a future for Vermont that's going to be including young people and aspirational innovators in a really exciting way.
I think that's interesting with thinking about the digital economy and looking at the other panelists sort of on our team today. Not everybody has that access to that digital economy, and some need more hands-on work. And Callie, I'm wondering if you can talk about sort of what is needed when we think about that, and especially in the rural economy too, and being able to spread beyond our urban centers, as Matt talked about.
Sure. I mean, I think if you're looking at the rural economy, you are really tapping into the working landscape and what a lot of people are trying to do in terms of making a living off the land, which is really hard. And I think there's a lot of kind of romanticizing about working the land and becoming a farmer. And it was quite trendy for quite a while. And I think it is still pretty trendy. And it's trendy until people do it for 5 to 10 years and burn out and realize, what's the viability here? Like, can I ever retire on this? Can I pay my employees? Is this just volunteer labor essentially? And a lot of farms are kind of volunteer labor and or started, were able to exist because there was so much like resources going into it in the beginning. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges is how do those farms stay on, provide jobs, provide a good economic future, not only for the owners, but for whoever's being employed, because employees, they want benefits, they want retirement, they want all the things. And I think at this point, farming and working the land is still very alternative, because a lot of times that's not offered. And I think if we want to see that be a part of this economy in general, we've got to make that change. And it goes back to margins and pricing structures and the national food system, and it's pretty complicated. So there's no easy solution, but I think it's there's so much amazing effort that goes into it, but it's kind of like pushing a big rock up a hill, and it's hard to make progress, and it does need a lot of, I think, state support to happen if people really do want to look at their backyard and still see pasture or still see woodlands and not see just development. I think especially in our current state where the land pressure is such a huge thing, I stay up late at night worrying that it's just going to happen like that. And like, we're going to look back 10 years from now and be like, whoa, we did not slow the train. And we were just so reactive and we weren't proactive, because once the pavement is down, the pavement's not coming up. So I think that's the land pressure. And then, there's lots of great people who want to get into farming, young people, they've got the energy, they're excited, they've got the knowledge, but how can they access land? It's so unaffordable. It's just incredibly challenging. And there are some great programs to help support that, but it's overall, that's a really, really big issue. And like transitions to the older generation of farmers, which is quite a few, especially in the dairy industry. What's the transition plans for them and for the next generation to take it on? And what's the incentive for the next generation if they've seen how challenging it can be financially for, their parents or their family, the motivation to have that be their life is, it's not as high. So how do we make that really appealing to people in the long term?
Well, Callie, I'm afraid we could just spend all of our time talking about what you just brought up. So there's a lot there, and I'm going to ask you to think about, I think there's a place here that we're going to come back to about policy recommendations, and maybe there's something in that you can think about. Everything that you expressed, there's so much to do in that way. And Leslie, I'm going to bring you into this part of the conversation, and I'm just thinking about when you talk about the pressure on the land and the access and affordability of the land and our farming future in those transitions, I think about Leslie, you're running 3 restaurants and an online store, and you're relying on that very farmer food piece to make sure that there's a pipeline to you serving your customers in a different way. And so you're scaling up and look at this notion of conservation, which was one of the elements of the Vermont proposition, as well as climate change and how that is going to impact us. I'm just curious what you're seeing from that perspective, and how does that impact your business, and then what do you sort of see as your vision into the future?
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's also interconnected, and for us, one of the things that we really push as a mission statement is that we use as much local products as we can. And we're an Italian restaurant, and we have some Italian imports. So the way I kind of put it to my employees and my chefs is that, there are some things that we're importing from Italy, but we have to really counterbalance that with as much local products as we possibly can, because it all has to, we play a vital role in making sure that we're using the products from farmers, and farmers play an incredibly vital role in making sure that we have fresh, excellent, produce and meats just to serve to our guests. And it's a very it's a beautiful dance when it's working well. And I know when COVID hit, there was a definite breakdown, and everyone scrambled. And I'm really amazed at how well Vermonters did, both in the restaurant industries and farms, to bring that all back together and feed people, and help with food security. So I hope that some of the lessons that we've learned in that, and some of the lessons that some of the things that we all see as critical issues that are affecting sort of all of us. I mean, our restaurants are on a very, very tight margin as well. And so we're always making decisions, you know, as we bring in, you know, wonderful local produce, we're always making decisions about how we can do that and stay within our margins. And if we have to increase our prices, will people still buy the food? Will people still come to our restaurants? And so it's to me, it's super important. I don't want to ever, you know, banter with someone who's worked the land to bring this beautiful product to us. And we're not going to beat anybody down for prices. We're going to give them what they deserve and what that is worth. And then we're going to have to pass some of that on to as well to the next to our guests. And it's just part of the, you know, all coming together to do this wonderful thing, which is having this great product and being able to, you know, serve it to our guests and just represent Vermont in that way. So I think in terms of all the issues that Callie was talking about, we share in that as well. You know, with the workforce, we're struggling right now to be able to even have tables out in our dining room. We finally got back open again, but we don't have people to wait on them. So we're working on how we can change our model and make sure that we are being as innovative and as fair and equitable in the way we compensate our staff, so we can attract staff and then we can continue to go, so then we can continue to buy food and continue to be open. I also want to say one of the great things about having a small business in Vermont is we're early on, I believe that Vermont recognized how important small businesses were. And one of the reasons why we are still standing when 30% of the restaurants are not, unfortunately, is because we were able to take advantage of some of those grants and loans and keep our doors open. And I know a lot of states did not have the same backing for their small businesses. So we're a critical part. The farms that are, you know, that are bringing us the produce is a critical part. And I think we all have to, we're all interconnected, pretty much.
Yeah, and I think that's probably part of our future too. That is not going away. I think, Callie, you expressed some worry about that, but I think, you know, the Vermont ethic is that we will make sure that we have open farmland and open forest lands, and we have, you know, working lands initiatives to do that. So that's really an important part. But part of what you were talking about there, Leslie, too, is sort of the notion of, you know, having a workforce so that you can manage the business or even scale up. And so, Blain, I know you've got a pretty new, maybe not new to you, but new to the world sort of business model, and scaling up is probably happening at a vastly different pace than perhaps Vermont companies are accustomed to seeing. You want to talk to us about what you're seeing in the notion of scaling up in Vermont and what you are excited about, and perhaps maybe some of the challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just listening to everyone else on the panel talk affirms the decision to try to build an aerospace company in Vermont. The interconnectivity, the innovation, the pragmatism is exactly what we're looking for in our decision to kind of build something here. And, you know, Kyle, our founder, started this in 2017 with a vision of changing the world of aviation and creating a sustainable future for it. And you do that by building things and by working within your community to build things, and you know, not just talk about it. And it's very much the Vermont ethos, right? Just go out and do it, get your head down and build. And in doing that, it's provided some opportunities here that we've been very fortunate with great backers and great support from the state and otherwise to build. And we're north of 200 people now and adding, I don't know, 5 or 6 a week at this point. And we've been really fortunate because one of our core beliefs is that the employee-employer trade is an equal trade of value, and we'll provide pay and fun things to do and great people to work with and a chance to change the world, and you'll provide the best you got. And In that value trade, that means that if somebody wants to take off in the morning and ski 120 days a year to skin up Mansfield and skin down before they come in, that's great. That's something that Vermont uniquely can provide for, right? This notion of true work-life balance, to experience the land, to live where you want and experience it, is super important to us. But it's also that pragmatic heads down work ethic. So a couple things on our minds right now are, as we continue to expand here, and we're going to build initial production facilities here at the south end of the airport and some underutilized land that was a quarry before. As we continue to build out, is how do we both near term work through talent acquisition and make sure that we get the right people in to develop electric propulsion systems and final assembly of aircraft. And then long term, how do we develop a workforce within Vermont to fill the future needs that we'll have? And both of those things are complementary but different, right? From a near-term perspective, talent acquisition is about housing, and it's about access to broadband. We've been really, COVID in a very strange way was this kind of acceleration of remote working was good for us. Obviously COVID's not good for anybody, but this acceleration of the ability to work remotely was. So we were able to bring back at least, the count I have now is 10, but it's growing. Folks that left the state of Vermont looking for work, whether they went to Seattle or Reno, that have come back in large part because their partners have been able to work remotely here. And we brought back 30 plus people into the state for the same reasons, that they came here to work for us because it was cool and it was interesting and it was hard work, but their partners were able to work remotely. We continue to push that. We're bringing more folks back every day. So, but part of the challenge is when they get here, where do they live? And that's always been a bit of a challenge in Vermont, but kind of COVID has pushed that even a little bit further. So I think getting really creative in a respectful way of land use that's not just sprawl, because that's not appropriate for this state. How do we solve for that? And then it gets into workforce development, right? So how do we work with not just Chittenden County, but how do we go into the tech schools and the high schools across the state and start building a workforce in, for us, electric propulsion, but realistically, electrification is the future of transportation. And so Vermont, I think in my mind, in our minds, has a real opportunity here to establish themselves as a leader, or ourselves as a leader, in the future of electric propulsion, the future of transportation, if we're thoughtful about that now. And that obviously benefits Beta, but I think benefits the state as you start to create opportunities in the next economy, which is building electric machines, whether they be cars or airplanes or whatever they may be. And getting out ahead of that curve is a really interesting inflection point now for the global economy and certainly for Vermont. And beginning to access that at an educational level to develop that future workforce, not just for us, but for years to come, is super important. I think through that electric propulsion, you start to create rural access in ways that you haven't before. For instance, we just electrified, turned on a charging station for our aircraft, but also for electric vehicles at Rutland State Airport, which is the first electrified state airport in the country. And it's something that Vermont should be very proud of, because they took the initiative at a governmental level to pull forward on this and partner with us to do that. And there's those kind of opportunities that will offer incredibly cost-effective, reliable transportation, whether it be air vehicles or electric vehicles, that will start to connect these rural communities in ways that has been we've not been able to do, but will within the next decade for sure. So yeah, for us, it's building out that workforce, creating kind of universal high-speed broadband access, so that if we bring somebody back from Tesla in Reno, whether they want to live in Northeast Kingdom or Chittenden County, it's really their call. And excited to be solving this with you guys.
This is that's an exciting thought, and I think part of this session and part of this entire conference is to really think about what is the vision for the future of Vermont. And I heard the term in a previous session, a close-eyed vision. And at first I was sort of struck by, that doesn't sound good, but it is. So close your eyes and what do you envision for Vermont? And I think we just heard Blain's vision for Vermont. And I'm curious if the other three panelists would like to sort of think out loud with their close-eyed vision as it relates to sort of your current work. If you were to close your eyes and think about that big, bold vision of Vermont, where Blain's vision is existence, where we're having, sort of that, electrification again of Vermont in so many ways and being able to bring that out to our rural areas. How would that impact you? Do you think that's the right vision? Do you have a different vision or a complementary vision to that as we think about Vermont, 30 years from now? What is your close-eyed vision? Anybody want to volunteer and jump in? Because if not, I will call on somebody.
I mean, I'll jump in because I feel in many ways that it's represented on this panel, right? I mean, it is what I think it was Frank Bryant who made a statement about Vermont, which I think we're living a little bit with the folks who are moving in and what they're looking for, which is that it was as if we were on a race with other states on a round track. We got so far behind, we ended up ahead. And I think that's absolutely, we didn't screw things up in an epic way. We maintained farms and forest land. We maintained our downtowns. We maintained that innovative spirit and a commitment to all the pieces that come along with that, which now gives us that infrastructure and nimbleness for, a relatively small airport to decide it was going to be groundbreaking and becoming electric friendly, or downtowns like White River Junction reinventing themselves, not to try to be, someplace else, but to be its own kind of weird, quirky self with, a lot of housing units, with interesting higher education, with really cool food and connections to the farms that are surrounding it, and becoming a place that imports that food. Whether it's we've got two co-ops in downtown White River Junction that are all doing it in different ways to be able to access that, and you can see it in the vibrancy that's happening in White River with younger people like moving in an active way, and so the closing the eyes and opening them again, it's about having that kind of vibrancy in our downtowns across the state that are driven by optimism, that are diverse in ideas and thought and race and other perspectives that can come in, that can be creating new innovations, whether it's on a farm, it's in a barn, garage, or in a lab or on a computer, and that or on a stage, right? The amazing arts creation that can happen in that, and they're all in interplay in a powerful way that can be inclusive of people who are coming from all kinds of educational backgrounds, all kinds of, you don't have to have grown up here to necessarily be a part of that community sense and the involvement that comes out of that. And if we do that right, we can have the kind of growth that I think we need to have in population, the growth that we need to have in housing, and not compromise for one moment the commitment to active, vibrant, and sustainable farm, forest, and recreational assets.
Leslie, you're sort of nodding your head. Do you want to jump in? Do you see this as we're building? I can see this already. We're building a vision. I'm writing it down. So I feel, do you want to add to this? Do you sort of have how you see sort of your slice of this world fitting into or changing as we move forward into the next couple of decades?
Yeah, I would add a couple of things to that. I think that's a very good beginning of an absolutely beautiful vision. And I would add to that, I'll take one small I'll bring it down to my own little world. One of the things that I want to do is make the restaurant industry and the people who work in it, I want it to be a very dignified job. I want people to be, I want to take away tipping altogether. I think it's a very racist and sexist policy, and I want it to be gone. I want people to come in and pay, you know, our guests to come and have a wonderful experience that that experience is made by everybody in the restaurant. And so they all are compensated fairly for that experience. So people are treated as if any other job. They come in and they work a job, they have a shift, they have, you know, they have dignity in that job. So that's what I'm trying to create for our restaurant. And hopefully one of these things that many restaurants, the whole industry is trying to battle with how to make that happen. I can see it happening in Vermont, and I can see it happening nationally, that conversation. But to take it a little bit further, I want to see that, you know, everybody can be fed, you know, that everybody has access to great, fresh food, and that we can't combat the food insecurity in the state, because I think that the state can do it. So that's I would add to the vision that people are able to get you know, good, affordable food, and are able to take care of their families. So I guess that's it.
That I think that leads right into you, Callie, doesn't that? I think, why don't you add to this big vision that we are trying to fit all of us into, thinking about how Vermont can take all the stuff that we already have that's good and preserve it, but also grow that into the future.
Yeah, I think I have just maybe one pushback in general on the overall concept of growth, because I think it's something I've experienced a lot in business. It's like, you have to grow. If you're not growing, you're dead. And I've actually seen that play out in a lot of businesses, and I've experienced in our own that that's not necessarily the answer, because the real question is like, who do you want to be when you grow up? And growth doesn't always answer that question or get you to where you want to be. So I like the way I've reframed it for myself is like, what's the right sizing or right scaling for who you are and what you want to be and what your business wants to be and what Vermont wants to be. I think I get the sense that it's a word that gets thrown around a lot, and it's just like push, growth, people, and just the pausing and slowing down of that concept to focus on more like, what's the growth for? What are we aiming towards? Like, what are the goals we're trying to get to? And what's the like appropriate growth for that? So don't have any answers to that, but it's something I think about a lot. Yeah, and so I think, and then I guess like being very creative, you know, like I think about our local schools. I grew up in Brookfield, and the pressure that was on to like consolidate the school to Randolph, and like there wasn't enough of a population, that whole story. And you know, how convenient that we had a school with a low population during COVID, because all of a sudden you could space out and everyone could go to the school still. And just thinking about what these things that seem like vestiges of the past, maybe like, oh, it's a school with a low population. How does that become an asset, not a liability? And so how do we think about infrastructure that was built, or just any systems that we have in place that's been built over the years, and how do we reconfigure it to our new goals? You know, you see people doing that in farming all the time, from, you know, dairy farmers trying new things, or, you know, whether it's trying a new enterprise, or they are experimenting with grass fed, or they're building new relationships with companies like Ben and Jerry's, or whatever the spectrum is. How do we use the infrastructure, the resources, the people, and be creative, be innovative, and meet the goals that we're looking for? Definitely no answers to that, but I think it's a mindset that I think is worth exploring.
Yeah, and I think we can think about growth in a different way than business growth or people growth. When I think about growth, I think about as an individual, I can grow. It doesn't mean I become more than I am. Hopefully it doesn't mean I become heavier than I am. But I mean, you know, you grow, your business grows. Maybe evolve is a better word than grow, because it gets confused with the growth concept that's traditional for businesses. Some businesses do need to scale up fast and do need to grow for their business to become successful. But just thinking about advancing through decades and thinking about that future, hopefully we're all going to evolve. All of our businesses are going to evolve. Blain, did you want to jump in?
Well,
here?
yeah, I love that dialogue, because
Oh, you just muted yourself somehow.
I'm sorry.
There we go.
Growth for the sake of growth is dangerous, right? It's
Yes.
there's this great quote from a French poet from a book called The Airman's Odyssey, that as perfection is achieved not when there's nothing left to add, but nothing left to take away. So how do you ideate through that curve of complexity down to an energy efficient solution that is kind of the goodness you're looking for? And it requires you to move through that kind of mental inertia that you get trapped when you have an initial solution. And so how do you get smarter about the end state that you're looking for, which for us and both the technology and the business side is as lean and efficient as a solution as we can find to use the least amount of energy, whether that's people energy or energy coming out of the ground or whatever it may be. And I think there's a lot of parallels here as we're trying to solve this. It'll be really easy to add more policy or more regulation or more this or more that. And it's how do we look at the problem we're trying to solve, identify not just a solution, because by definition, if you have a solution, you don't have a problem anymore, but identify the solution that allows for this vision that you guys have all talked about, which I think is beautiful, which is allowing for this innovation to happen in all sectors of the state. In a way that doesn't burden the state any further and allows for the kind of freedom and creativity that is what is so great about Vermont, right? As soon as you start adding policy and burden, it starts to kind of put downward pressure in my mind at some level on that creativity and innovation that is just naturally kind of found in the state. So Callie, I think it's just a brilliant comment about let's be focused on what growth means and how we bring that forward.
I put a note in, just a reminder in the chat to the panelists about the 9 elements. I'm sure you've studied them, committed them to memory and all of that, but and I'm sure many of the attendees have already read through the Vermont proposition, and the 9 elements are broadband, diversity and inclusion, conservation, civic engagement, state planning, climate change, childcare and innovation. I didn't count those, but I think that's all of them. Oh, and the other one I did not add in there was sort of reducing poverty and creating equality, which we've sort of talked about here a little bit. So these are all 9 huge, big things. I'd like you to take one of them and relate it to your work specifically and your life's work and what you think, how you can share that story. This isn't like a policy question or a vision question, but talk a little bit about one of those elements and share a story about how that relates to your work and your life. I'll look for a volunteer to start us. Great. Well, Callie, since you've been going last, I'm going to start you first. You see how this works? This is just like back in the day. But take one of those things. I know when I think about them and some of the things that you've already talked about, take one of those things and just give us a little bit of story about how that works in your world.
Sure. I think the civic engagement piece is kind of what pops out to me. Just from my personal how I got here life story piece is that I was looking at helping other communities and other countries in my 20s and really interested in kind of international development and had some experience with that and just realized oh, what am I doing? I don't know anything about this community. I'm coming in here with some grand ideas and this is just really awkward. So I got out of that real quick. And the realization for me was that I wanted to be a part of my community. And I went through environmental studies majoring at UVM, and that was very depressing and all like doom and gloom. And for me, I got into like one farming class and I was just like, oh, that is positive, and that is a positive way to contribute to your community through food. And that just like changed the whole lens from really depressed and like the world is ending to I can be a part in my own small way. And so for me, that's just been the vehicle through food and farming and coming back to my hometown, Brookfield, and building the business and, you know, employing people in the community and working with my family. And just, I think it's, to me, that civic engagement of how do you, oh, I have a quote actually. Use your shoulder to firmly push forward the wheel of change, helping to bend the moral arc of the universe. Someone said it recently and now it's on my wall. I should try to credit them, but I'm not sure who it was. But just what's that one little thing that you're doing in your community if you want to do something that does make a difference over time. And I tend to get very overwhelmed in food and farming because it's like the system is not really made for small businesses to be successful. And that's pretty frustrating. But you got to kind of keep that confidence going every day to just do that little bit. So that's kind of the civic engagement piece for me.
I love that quote. So I'm going to ask you to put that into the chat just so that we can capture that when you have a moment. That would be great. Leslie, do you want to jump in here and talk a little bit about one of those elements and relate it to your life and work?
Sure. I'm going to take diversity, equity, and inclusion. One of the things that I used to feel when I first opened my business, I opened it with two white men, friends of mine, and I was never looked at as one of the owners. So when someone would walk in, they would see me and I'd be working, but it was never expected that I was the owner there. And it used to upset me at first. And then I used to kind of, look at it as a negative. One day, not too long ago, I had a friend of mine, I hired her daughter, and she went home to her mother and just glowed at how exciting it was to see me as the owner and see me going around telling everybody what to do. It was the positive side of that. And of course, I always know this to be true, how important it is for people to see themselves in different jobs, and how important it is to have a diverse workforce. And so I just sort of, it was a positive sort of twist to some of the feelings that I had as an owner in this business. But there've been other things, of course, but that sort of made me feel like it came full circle for me.
I love that story, and I love it. For me, it also brings out sort of that next generation, that mentoring. It's not a formal mentoring program, but the fact that just by being and doing and owning your business and, telling other people what to do, people are inspired by that, young people. So that's awesome. That's great. Matt, do you want to take one of those elements?
The predictable one for me is the one that I've been working on for 20 years, which is on broadband, and it being the electricity of our time, and frankly, so I'll do the expected, although may veer into a little bit of the other ones, because at the end of the day, it's what can empower all of these things in a rural place. Right, it can allow for Blain to hire people whose significant others can then work for their other employer from anywhere in the world. It allows for truly equitable education opportunity. Right, it's the homework gap is how the current acting chair of the FCC talked about it, and COVID made it about as plain as can be. That if you had access to broadband, you were connected to education continuing, and if you were not, you were not. And it also is a critical part of the future of healthcare, and trying to make it so that we don't have to make everyone drive all over the place for things that can be routine and done over video conferencing. The work that's being done to actually solve the infrastructure piece is real, and it's exciting and can provide equal opportunity the same way electricity allowed parts of the state and farms, frankly, to be able to succeed when they were at a significant disadvantage in the early 1900s, and can close that gap. And it opens up all kinds of other avenues for small businesses to be able to not be dependent on massive distributors and gatekeepers who do marketing so that they can do direct sale and keep so much more of that work that they do in value, and create value chains that are tighter in a community like Vermont, while having a global market, even for your small product, or a regional market, right? Whatever it is, to Callie's point, that you feel you need to meet your goals, lifestyle, and support your family. So anyway, I just think we're at an exciting moment. The leadership of the last few administrations have been really focused on this, and are now starting to see the fruit of that being borne out. I do also just want to talk a little bit about the planning and climate change and conservation, because I think they all go together as well, which is that, we're a state, and I'll get back to the growth thing. And I wasn't necessarily talking about it has to be all scalable companies and trying to be unicorns and all of that stuff. But I do think we need to be a welcoming state for more people with more that are going to be committed to being full-time parts of our community, and bring diverse views. And in order to do that and not lose our Vermont values, we need to concentrate on, an old phrase is smart growth, but actually doing that work in our magnificent downtowns, so that, and other kinds of interesting experiments like Cobb Hill in Vermont that create sustainable co-living spaces and other kinds of things that meet people where they are. And we can do that. And there are so many parts of the state that have seen exodus of people that have beautiful downtowns ready for, apartments for folks of all incomes and all levels to be able to create that energy and vibrancy across the state. So that's what I mean by growth. And I sometimes get pushback from friends who are like, no, we should shut the borders, no more people coming in. I really don't think that's the right answer. I really think we should be able to sustain that growth in a real way without compromising for 1 minute the incredible natural resources and farms and forest lands that we have, and the sense of community that keeps us small, that keeps us connected to small schools, that keeps us connected to a democracy, and this is in the civic engagement, that is led by, in many places, town meetings and democracy of interaction and voice that we really missed in this COVID year. And I know so many communities that are hungry to get back in a real way in town meetings that can be in person.
I do think that's part of the attraction of Vermont. It's not for everybody, and it's a good thing because we don't need everybody. We just need a few more people, not a lot more people. And I think that if we had too many, it would certainly not keep that sort of community involvement. That's what people long for, and that's what we so much miss over the last year. Blain, would you like to take one of those 9 elements and relate it to your work and your life?
Sure. Yeah, and I'll try to be quick so we have a few minutes for questions, but again, loved everything folks said. I grew up very, very poor town in upstate New York, over by Syracuse, and my parents were small business owners that kind of were hubs of the community, their business became kind of a hub of the community, and saw the importance of community engagement and involvement and mentorship and that kind of business building that happens when a community pulls in together to support each other, right? And that's frankly what drew me to Vermont 20 plus years ago, was the opportunity to grow in a business that was very much like that here at a different scale with IDX. But so for us here at Beta, community engagement is massively important. So we go Vermont first on our supply chain when we can, right? So there's some incredible talent here in advanced composites in Bennington and Essex, and there's some great machine shops in Winooski, some great work happening over in the Northeast Kingdom and St. Albans. And so what we find is that we have this kind of concept as well, that no one's going to care as much as us, but really, so we do a lot in-house, but really when you extend that, no one's going to care as much as the Vermont community. So when you plug in and tap into that talent, there's this just weird magic that happens when you tap into it. We have a really strong internship program. We have, I think, 60 interns running around here, from college level down to high school level internships with local high schools that are pulling in and we're trying to work with. And so that ability to kind of coach and mentor and engage with the community is just massively important for us. The other piece that's been important for me since I can remember is conservation and climate change. You know, as a kind of pretty passionate outdoorsman in a lot of different venues, and seeing kind of the impact that can be done, being able to plug in here in Vermont and actually try to make a difference in kind of the trajectory of climate change through aviation, and with our great partners, be able to do that has been important. But Vermont's a big part of that. So we turned down, we had opportunities to go to other states for a variety of reasons. We chose not to, largely because of the type of person that decides to live and work in Vermont is the type of person that shares our values. Beta values are Vermont values in a lot of ways. The other piece is that, you know, Vermont's pretty innovative when it comes to energy use. So we looked at, rather than energy cost, energy constituencies. So, you know, rather than go to Florida where 30% of their energy is renewable, 70% is not, even though it's cheap. It was really important for us to kind of put our money where our mouth was and say, you know, because Vermont's 99% plus renewable energy, that's where we want to build this aircraft. And in large part because of the Vermont ethos has been to push forward on all these issues, makes it the perfect place for a business like ours to attract the right people who are also mission oriented and want to do the right thing. And to just kind of keep fostering that within the community, to continue to build that ecosystem up, is just so important for us. So and you know, fits both personally and business. So it was, you know, it's a unique place in the world where you can merge your business and personal passions together in a single spot.
That's great. I'm going to, I think that we've wrapped in most of the elements. There are a couple that we haven't, and I'm not sure if we can get them in the Q&A or not, but for all of you who are attending, this is when we're shifting the focus to you, and there's only one question in the Q&A. And so right now is when your hands should go on the keyboard and start asking all your questions, or perhaps you just have something that you want one of us to react to. I think folks are pretty willing to share their thought. I know Ellen Kaler is in the chat lighting that up with some great comments as well. Ellen, feel free to jump in and ask a particular question, but this is really your opportunity to engage us, and you've been doing a lot of listening. So I encourage you to do that. Just looking at the questions in the chat first, not the questions, but the comments about, you know, I think, Callie, you and I had a conversation about growth versus evolution, the evolution of people, the evolution of businesses, rather than using that term growth. And I think, Ellen, you had mentioned that might be a better way to be thinking about that, because growth has those connotations of we must get bigger and bigger. So I think that's good. And then identifying that with the notion of the full-time population versus that part-time. We want people to move here and become engaged in our communities, and that's how our communities grow/evolve, not necessarily grow bigger, but just evolve and be that welcoming community to add those different voices, people who look different and think different than you, to make sure that we grow as a community. So I think that's the conversation that's going on in the chat. regarding the one question, I'm hoping the other attendees are crafting their questions right now, but the one question goes back to one of our very beginning of our conversations. And Leslie, I'm gonna probably put you on the spot with this, but maybe Callie, you wanna jump into this as well. Keith Epstein asks, what can be done to help restaurants and stores such as grocery, convenience, general stores use local farm products easily? And this, I think, is almost the better part, and have it be the norm, the standard way of doing things, instead of restaurants having to work so hard to make it happen.
I don't know. Although I will say that it does happen, you know, and I know that I, you know, challenge our restaurants to do so, but it's something that they all believe in. They all are right in there with me. And I feel like they're, you know, I serve on the board of the Intervale, and one of the things I talk to Travis a lot about is I wish there was like a food hub for our restaurants, so that we could go and get, you know, and go to one place and be able to get all this great, you know, this great produce. And so we talk about that a lot, but there's also this element of a lot of our farm partners connecting with our chefs that is really, you can't really, you know, change that. It's really an important relationship that is built. So I come from the thought that, you know, there have been times when we've been out of arugula and the owner of Half Pint Farms went out and picked it and brought it back. And to me, it seems like how wonderful that is, but my gosh, that must just burn people out at the same time. So I don't know. I think that it does exist, and I have to imagine there's a lot of it, but I also come from the space where I'd like to see it just a little bit easier for, at least for our restaurant, to be able to make that, to be able to get that. We can get it from Black River. That's a third party. I would love to be able to go down and just grab, and we can do that. But you know, we're right in Burlington, and I don't know what goes out in other, you know, counties. Callie might know more about it. Definitely.
I don't, or maybe I do, I don't know. I don't think I do at the moment. I think it's tricky, because I think it goes back to the consumer, and I think we're extremely well trained to expect convenience and things to be cheap all across the board in our whatever we buy in life, but food is definitely one of them. And so we're kind of always coming up against those like base level expectations of the consumer. And so it's very tricky, because I think, you know, when we're selling to people, you know, it's not that they don't want to pay us a fair price, it's that they don't feel like they can pass it on to the customer. And that continues to be a struggle for them. Like at the end of the day, the customer is where they're going to choose to spend their money. So, you know, I don't know how you solve those big picture issues. I think it's really tricky. I think in the pandemic, there was some nice shifting to local, because it provided people wanted more than just convenience and affordability. And so local food was able to offer that. I suspect that trend will stick around in a mild way, but from what I'm hearing, there's also a fair amount of people who are just going back to the old ways of convenience and less expensive food. So I think that's a really, really big question. And yeah, of course, you know, there's not a lot of money to go around in the first place too. So like people also don't have a lot of money to spend on food. So it's complex.
I will say, Callie, my kids would pay any amount of money for the stuff that you guys produce. So just to be clear on that. Full on addict. So, that's a different issue.
So there's some good information for those who are following along here in the chat. Some of the Vermont Fresh Network is a good resource, and being able to think about that. And I think there's a good newsletter link in there by Ellen as well, sort of thinking about that. And I see that somebody has been spurred on by the typing on the keyboards. This is a really long question from Jennifer Zakara. and she is the head of Vermont Academy and thinking about being a school for the future, developing internships and apprenticeships for students. They rented space in the village in Saxton's River, and they're going to let students set up business ideas. Any thoughts or advice for them in regard to this space, and also in regard to networking and connecting with all of these new initiatives in the state? They're a small school with a history of entrepreneurship. 65% of their graduates since 1940 have opened up their own businesses. So advice for this education institution on how to help prepare our future leaders. Blain.
Yeah, no, first I was going to say it's absolutely wonderful that that the school has done that. I mean, it's a wonderful opportunity. We have found some of our best folks here have come through similar type programs, whether it be through the Generator in Burlington or other things like this in Southern Vermont or even some out of state. And I think stimulating that maker space type environment that is tied into, potentially, ideally imprentships or partnerships with local businesses, for us has been just an absolute blessing, and very selfishly. And I think just encouraging folks to get out there and build, paper projects don't fail. And getting out and building and exposing gaps is a very fast way to innovate. In our experience here, and so to the extent that there's opportunities to plug in and solve real problems with real businesses, whether they be in agriculture or technology or otherwise, just getting out there and building it with the leaders in the community is, if in our experience, has been incredibly powerful, and would love to connect offline very selfishly as well to see how we can help participate there. But that's just a wonderful move for the community.
So to connect, certainly use the HOVA platform, because you guys can message each other, and so that would be
Excellent.
great. Leslie, you wanted to add?
I would also add that Lisa Wood is the director of the Women's Small Business Program at Mercy Connections, and she might be a really good resource for you as well. So if you reach out to Mercy Connections and ask for Lisa Wood, might be a really good resource.
One of my favorite ones for you to think about is GW Plastics down in Bethel, Vermont, has something called the School of Tech. And if you Google it, it's incredible. They have a high school program, a college program, and then an on-the-job training program. So helping to train their workforce, and their HR director there put that together. It's pretty impressive for folks who are trying to figure that out. So that might be some way that you could plug into that as well.
I'd also love to connect, there is an emerging number of these innovation hubs that are being created across the state. The folks in Windham County are trying to pull together all the different kinds of resources to be able to do that. Again, the Black River Innovation Campus right up the interstate in Springfield is doing really incredible out-of-the-box work, and they're doing it in collaboration with the local high school and local technical school, where innovative ideas are coming out as well. And so would love to chat. And I think that it's exciting to see a place like Vermont Academy taking that step to provide engagement across the state. So I think it's the right moment, and there's lots of ways to do it well.
That's great. I see that our time is coming to a close a little bit. We've got about 6 minutes left, and then we're going to have another session where we sort of do a wrap up of that. And so I've been frantically taking notes about everything you folks have said, and I have been told that in the next session you get exactly 30 to 60 seconds to say what happened in this time frame. So I'm going to try to summarize it here for our panelists and for our guests, and then maybe give you folks an opportunity to reframe that if I've missed something. Just trying to think about, you know, our focus is business creation and innovation, and thinking about what our vision is for the future. And I think, you know, one of the things that I heard was we have lots of visions, right? Because it's not just one thing, but we think about that Vermont future, thinking about how all of our assets, we might have taken things slow and might not have developed as fast as other areas, but that is our asset, and we're glad that we kept that asset. So for the next 30 years, we want to make sure that we continue to have that, really thinking about our communities, making sure that our businesses are growing at a sustainable rate, and thinking about evolution more than growth. Putting employees in a place where everybody has a dignified job, where they're paid well, where they can afford to live here, and thinking about lifting them up as we think about that evolution of business and creation. I like putting out sort of that, you know, close-eyed vision, that big picture vision of Vermont being a leader in transportation electrification. Certainly, you know, that doesn't surprise me coming from Beta, but, you know, we have had a history here of putting renewable energy first and putting out strong goals. It matches what we've already done in the policy arena. So doing that and making sure that when we do all of that, creating jobs for people, and being able to scale up on a Vermont style, we're really thinking about making sure that we conserve our land and value it, and make sure that we don't destroy that in the process of our evolution over the future. So that's sort of the takeaways that I have pulled. Please help me understand if I missed something that I should add to that.
That sounds, Betsy, it sounds like you captured that well. Thank you.
It sounds like a place I would like to live. How about you all? Yeah. Well, and I think that's because it represents sort of where we are with a little bit of futurist to that. So thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and your perspectives, and I look forward to meeting some of you in person. Well, I always look forward to meeting all of you in person, but some of you I've never actually met before. So I look forward to that. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.